एक
उस लिंक पे शायद नहीं हुआ है
मिनट
लाइव।
में शुरू करते हैं। लेट द पीपल जॉइन। चांदनी, आर यू सेइंग? क्या कह रहे हो आप?
Are we live now? Is this connected? I guess people are not able to see. I am getting messages that it's not live yet. Hello?
यानी
Hello?
कुछ कह रहे थे आप?
मैं कह रही थी उस लिंक पे शायद से लाइव नहीं हुआ है, लोगों के मैसेज आ रहे थे। एक बार चेक करें या?
ये हो गया? जस्ट ए मिनट। ये चांदनी लाइव हो गया उस पे, उसी लिंक पर जो वो चैनल लिंक है उस पे जब उस पे जाएंगे ना लाइव हो गया।
ठीक है।
First of all, I welcome Chandni Gupta ji, young and dynamic speaker on this India's.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sumit ji.
Chandni, you are first time on this CASA platform, so I welcome in this India's series. Today is Masterclass 8, in which you are going to deliver derivative and hedge accounting. Generally, जो members होते हैं ना कहीं hedge and derivative accounting में since starting confused रहते हैं कि इसकी कैसे करें clear. With respect to Ind AS, I think you will tell how to account for and disclose everything.
जी.
First, Chandni, we will cover the topic, and in the last 5 to 10 minutes, we will try to cover the queries.
Sure. Should we start?
Ha, you can start, Chandni. Once again, welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Sumit ji. First of all, welcome everyone to this channel, and I would like to thank Sumit ji for this amazing platform and inviting me to this webinar where I can present my content in front of you all. So today we will discuss derivatives and hedge accounting. And Sumit ji, please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, Chandni, screen visible and everything clear.
Okay. So everyone, today we will discuss derivatives and hedge accounting. First of all, let's understand what is derivative. So derivative is an instrument which derives its value from an underlying variable asset. It involves no or little initial net investment and is settled at a future date. We all have heard about stock market. Many of us invest in it. Some of us trade on a daily basis. And so the normal stock market in which we trade is where we buy or sell stocks today. But there is also an option to buy or sell tomorrow at a fixed price. And that price is fixed today. Right? So you can buy or sell tomorrow or maybe day after tomorrow or 1 month later, 2 months later, and so on and so forth. And in this arrangement, you don't really have to make or take actual delivery of stock. You just have to settle it in net. So suppose if a stock is currently trading at 72 rupees and there's a perception that the prices will fall. Now there's a risk for you. And you think there is an opportunity in future if you fix your sell price at say 70 rupees. So you go and buy a future contract to sell that stock at 70 after 1 month of time. This contract is a derivative instrument. The prices will change in relation to the underlying stock. Now, say after 1 month, the price falls to 68. Initially, you had the stock at 72, but you entered into a future contract to sell at 70. And after 1 month, the actual price is at 68. So in your stock, which you bought at 72, you have lost 4 rupees. But on the other hand, in the future contract, where you fixed the sale price at 70, you have gained 2 rupees. Now, since you don't own a stock to sell, you were playing in derivatives, so you don't really have to actually sell a stock at 70 to someone, but the market will give you 2 rupees of gain in your account. That's how the derivative market works. So here you can see. So basically, it's a contract where parties agree to exchange financial instruments at a future date, the terms of which are determined at the inception. As the prices of the underlying in the financial market changes, those terms may become favorable or unfavorable. Now, suppose in previous example, the stock price after 1 month goes to 74 instead of falling to 68. In that case, your future contract to sell at 70 will become your liability, because in the market the stock is selling at 74, but since you are into a contract, you have a contractual obligation to settle it at 70 rupees only. So this condition has become unfavorable for you, and that's how the contract has become a liability for you rather than an asset. So now we can see the derivatives market is very volatile. It reflects how good or bad your decision was to enter into a particular transaction. So when we talk about a value of a derivative instrument being linked to an underlying asset, the asset can be interest rates, currency rates, commodity prices, equity prices, or index prices. All these are variable factors, and based on which the value of derivative move and will reflect the sanity of your decision to buy or sell. The most popular derivatives in market are forward, future, and options. Now let's discuss these derivatives in detail. Forward and futures have the same essence, but the difference is forward contract is an over-the-counter agreement. This is a private agreement between two parties who agree to make a settlement at a future date, whereas future contract is traded on the exchange market. And it is marked to market on a daily basis until the end of the contract. That means the gain or loss due to price changes is reflected in your account on a daily basis, so that at the end of the contract, your account is already at the market rate. That's how the futures work. Now, what is option? Option, on the other hand, are of two types: put option and call option. When you buy an option, you get a right to make the first move. Suppose it's a put option, then you have a right to sell at a fixed price in future. And if it's a call option, then you have a right to buy at a fixed price in future date. Whereas when you sell an option, we call it writing an option. So when you sell or write an option, instead of getting a right, you incur an obligation to buy or sell at a fixed price in the future date. That's how the derivatives work. So these derivatives are generally used by various users such as corporates, traders, dealers, financial institutions, portfolio investors, etc., for varied purposes such as hedging, speculation, arbitrage, etc. So out of several uses, hedging is one most popular amongst corporates, financial institutions, and corporate investors. They use derivatives to hedge their financial risk. Now, financial risk is basically the unexpected changes in the financial conditions of the underlying asset. And to hedge means to protect or to offset an anticipated loss. Now, in context of Indes, when we talk about derivatives, so as per Indes 32, 109, and 107, These three indices talk about financial instruments. As per these indices, there are three types of financial instruments: financial asset, financial liability, and equity instrument. So derivative instruments meets the definition of a financial instrument because it involves exchange of financial asset or financial liability. And accordingly, these are within the scope of Index 32, 109 and 107. Now, suppose if this settlement is to be done in the entity's own equity instruments, own equity shares, then it will be classified as an equity instrument only if the settlement involves fixed amount of cash or another financial instrument for a fixed number of equity shares. So there has to be a fixed arrangement, then only it will be classified as equity instrument. But if either of the instruments, be it cash or the number of equity shares, not the value, but the number of equity shares is variable, then it will be classified as a financial liability or a financial asset, depending upon if you have a right to receive or you have an obligation to pay. Now let's understand the accounting of derivatives. In case a derivative instrument has been classified as a financial asset or a financial liability, it will be measured at fair value upon initial recognition, and subsequently also it is measured at fair value through profit and loss account. According to FVTPL, any changes in fair value is recognized in profit and loss account. In case it is an equity instrument, so equity instrument basically evidences a residual interest in the assets of the entity after deducting all the liabilities, and it is measured at fair value upon initial recognition, and any changes in fair value of equity is not recognized in the financial statements. It remains intact. The same value is carried forward on year-on basis. So generally for derivatives, no entry is passed at the date of entering into the contract because no transaction actually takes place. Because as per derivative, any settlement has to be done at a future date, at a fixed price. So on day zero, where we are standing, there's no entry to be passed. And it will be accounted for only at the settlement date, or when the settlement date is beyond a financial reporting period, then at the balance sheet date, the gain or loss on derivative is recognized in profit and loss account with the creation of derivative asset or a derivative liability, depending upon its gain or loss. And at the settlement date, it will be adjusted against the overall gain or loss. Now here's another aspect of derivatives, embedded derivatives. It's quite complicated, but we'll make it easier. So embedded derivative is basically a component of a hybrid contract that also includes a non-derivative host, with the effect that some of the cash flows of the combined instrument vary in a similar way to a standalone derivative. Right, so a derivative that is attached to a financial instrument but is contractually transferable independently. It has the independence of being transferable, then it is not an embedded derivative. It is just another separate financial instrument. Say entity X issues a redeemable debenture to entity Y, and the amount of interest and principal are indexed to the value of equity instruments of entity X. Here, the redeemable debenture is a host contract, whereas the exposure of this instrument to the value of equity instrument, this entire arrangement, is an embedded derivative. So the changes in the value of equity instruments of entity X will affect the cash flows of interest and principal in the same way had it been a standalone derivative. Right, so that's why the exposure of this instrument to the risk of changes in value of equity instruments will be classified as an embedded derivative. Now, in certain circumstances, an embedded derivative is required to be separated from the host and accounted for separately as a financial instrument. An embedded derivative, so what are the conditions where it can be separated, or maybe we should say where it cannot be separated? So embedded derivative will not be separated in following cases: Number one is where the hybrid contract contains a host instrument which is classified as a financial asset within the scope of Ind AS 109 or 32. So financial asset is basically a contract, a right to receive cash or another financial instrument when the conditions are favorable. Right? If the hybrid contains a host contract which is classified as financial asset, then you need not separate the embedded derivative. Number two is where the economic characteristics and risks of the embedded derivative are closely related to those of the host. So there has to be a connection, there has to be a relation between the host and the embedded derivative. Number third is a separate instrument with the same terms as the embedded derivative would not meet the definition of a derivative. Then in that case, the embedded derivative will not be separated, because to qualify as an embedded derivative, it has to qualify as a derivative first. Last but not the least is the hybrid contract is measured at FVTPL. So if the entire contract has been measured at fair value through P&L, then we need not separate the embedded derivative. So these four cases are when we need not separate the embedded derivative from the host contract. And when we do not separate the embedded derivative, the entire hybrid instrument will be measured at fair value through P&L. And any changes in fair value will be recognized in profit and loss account. So when an entity is unable to measure reliably the fair value of an embedded derivative on the basis of its terms and conditions, the fair value of embedded derivative is the difference between the fair value of the hybrid contract and the fair value of the host. So there are three parts. Number one is fair value of the hybrid contract. Number two, fair value of the host contract. And number three, fair value of the embedded derivative. So if you note the two of them, you can derive the third one. That's how it's a simple maths. So when the embedded derivative is separated, the derivative will be measured at fair value through P&L, just like another derivative, initial recognition at fair value and subsequently measured at FVTPL. And the host part of the hybrid contract, the non-derivative part, will be measured in accordance with Ind AS 109, either at amortized cost or FVTPL. So let's discuss the accounting of embedded derivatives in bit detail. So first case, when the embedded derivative is separated, as we just discussed, it will be initially recognized at fair value. So there are two cases. Now, in case of a non-option based derivative, the fair value is zero at inception, because there are no terms and the parties do not have the rights and obligations on day zero. They have the rights and obligations at a fixed date as per the contract. And in case it's an option based contract, then it will have a fair value equal to its intrinsic value. So the options basically have intrinsic value, which is equal to its fair value. But even though no entry is recorded for derivative at inception, as no transaction has actually taken place yet, it will be settled at a future date and the entry will be passed then. And in case the settlement date is beyond a financial reporting period end, then at the balance sheet date, it will be recognized at FVTPL and the changes in fair value will be recognized in P&L. Now, the host contract, the non-derivative part of the hybrid contract, will be measured at again fair value, and the fair value will be determined as fair value of hybrid contract minus the fair value of embedded derivative. Subsequent measurement, as we just discussed, embedded derivative at FVTPL and the host derivative as per the applicable Ind AS. And other cases, if the fair value of embedded derivative cannot be measured reliably, then if you know the fair value of hybrid contract and the fair value of host contract, then the difference between the two is the fair value of embedded derivative. But if the fair value of the host contract also cannot be measured reliably, suppose the two of the three components cannot be measured, then the entire hybrid contract will be measured at FVTPL. And similarly, if the embedded derivative is not separated at all, then also the entire hybrid contract will be measured at FVTPL. Now let's take an example. So in this example, we can see on 1st January, ABG Private Limited has entered into a contract to buy petrol products from ANA Associates in a firm domiciled in Dubai, for which the delivery is due after 6 months, that is on the 30th June. The purchase price is 50 million US dollars. Now let's evaluate the transaction first. ABG is an Indian company. It has a functional currency in Indian rupees, INR, but the petrol products are usually dealt in US dollars. That's why they have been denominated in US dollars. Now here in the contract, on 1st January, ABG has made a commitment to buy petrol products from ANA on 30th June, which means after 6 months time, for $50 million. So on 30th June, ABG needs 50 million US dollars to settle the contract. Now suppose on 1st January, when they entered into the contract, the exchange rate was 60 rupees per dollar, which means on day 0, the price of petrol products was 3,000 million rupees, Indian rupees, but the contract is to make payment after 6 months, means the company has an exposure to the risk of falling value of INR. For this reason, it is important for the investors of the company to know their exposure to such financial risk, and that their company has an obligation to pay US dollars after 6 months. And since the exchange rate is variable part, it will fluctuate, it may be in favor of the company or not in favor of the company. For that purpose, the company will do a proper accounting for this transaction and give proper disclosures. Now coming back, since the company has to make a delivery after 6 months of 50 million US dollars, it looks at the forward rates of dollar on day 0, and suppose 6 months forward rate on 1st January, when we entered into the contract, is 65. So on 1st January, the spot rate was 60 rupees, and the 6 months forward rate on 1st January is 65. So the company will assume that after 6 months, it will buy petrol products in exchange of 3,250 million rupees, which is at the forward rate. So if we see the INR, Indian rupee, in the middle, the contract has 2 legs. Number 1 is the host contract to buy the petrol products at 3,250 million rupees, and the forward contract to pay the US dollars in exchange of 3,250 million rupees. Since the exchange rate will vary with time and we have a fixed rate of 65 for 6 months from the day 0, this is a derivative. And as it is attached to a host of contract to buy petrol products, it is an embedded derivative. And we need to separate this embedded derivative from the host contract. So let's do the accounting. On 1st January, no entry will be passed because the transaction has not taken place yet. Right? The contract will be settled when the asset will be delivered. On 31st March 2019, that is the balance sheet date, you can see one entry here. Now what is this? On balance sheet date, the contract is still not settled, but the forward contract, which is our derivative part, will be measured at FVTPL as we discussed earlier. That means the changes in fair value will be recognized in profit and loss account. Say on 31st March, a 3 months forward rate is 66 rupees. Now why 3 months forward rate? Because on 1st January, we entered into a 6 months contract, and now we are halfway through the period. We are already standing 3 months later. So we will have to look at the 3 months forward contract on that date. So on 31st March, a 3 months forward rate is suppose 66 rupees, which means the company has lost 1 rupee per dollar on the forward contract. since we had a fixed rate of 65 and now the rate is 66, where we could have make a sale of 66 rupees. We have a contract under which we have to make sale of 65 only. That's why we have lost 1 rupee per dollar. So the company will recognize this 1 rupee per dollar, that means 50 million rupees in PNL on 31st March, and a derivative liability will be recognized correspondingly. So that's what this entry is saying. The loss on derivative contract, which goes to PNL for 66 and 65 difference, 50 million rupees, with a credit to the derivative liability. Now on 30th June, which is the settlement date, here we will receive the delivery of our asset. Say the spot rate is 68 rupees. On this date, the company will record the asset of the host contract, and it will record the asset at 3,215 million rupees, which was the forward rate initially. The embedded derivative is considered to expire because it is the settlement date now. The derivative liability of 50 million plus a further loss of 68 minus 66. Because on this date now, since we already had brought up our derivative liability at 66 against 65 on 31st March, now again the rate has become 68. So we have lost further 2 rupees per dollar. So now our cumulative liability has become 150 million rupees. That's why we have recorded this one more entry, loss on derivatives PNL for 100 million to derivatives liability. Now the cumulative balance in derivative liability is 150 million rupees, and we will receive the asset. So the first let's settle the derivative liability. We will pay off the derivative liability at 150 million rupees, and the host contract will be settled at 3,250 million rupees. Now, if you can see what is the net impact on 30th June, the net impact is that the asset has been recorded at the forward rate of 65 because we had fixed that rate initially. We had fixed the cost of our asset initially because that is the ultimate purchase price for us. And the asset is always recorded at purchase price as per Ind AS 16. And the derivative liability has been cancelled out. It has been paid off. The net payment that I am making is 3,400 million rupees, which is at the spot rate on 30th June. So what we have done is we have made the payment at spot rate on 30th June only, but we have separated the contracts. We have separated the original asset cost and the derivative part included in that contract. We have just separated the two, and ultimately we have made the payment at spot rate. This is just a way where how the investors are aware of the exposure to the impact of movement in financial factors separately from the original purchase contract of a non-derivative asset. I hope everyone is clear on that part. Now let's move on to the second leg, which is the hedge accounting. So as discussed earlier, hedging means to protect or offset an anticipated loss. The objective of hedge accounting is to represent in the financial statement the entity's exposure to some risk, the effect of its risk management activities that use the financial instruments to manage those risks. So many corporates and investors are exposed to financial risk when they're dealing in securities or they have transactions in foreign currency. Now, therefore, they use hedging tools to mitigate the risk. Hedging involves entering into a contract for buy or sell of financial instruments that have negative correlation with their existing position. Now, say a company has a stock, say ABC stock, and it anticipates a fall in prices of that stock. Therefore, to reduce this financial risk, now the company has a financial risk of falling in prices of the stock. So the company will buy a put option on ABC stock. That is a right to sell at a fixed price at a future date. Now let's understand. Say company A had 10 shares of ABC stock at 100 each. In 3 months' time, it estimates a decline in prices and hence go for a put option to sell 10 shares with a strike price of 80 rupees. At maturity date, say the stock price is the stock is trading at 75 rupees. Now what has happened? The company has lost 25 rupee per share on its original stocks, whereas on the other hand, it has gained rupees 5 per share on its put option. Right. So now what is the net impact? The company has lost 25 per share, that is on 10 shares. So total loss is 250 on the original contract, original stocks. But on the other hand, since the company had bought a put option, it has gained 5 rupee per share on that. So 50 rupees gained there. So overall loss of the company now stands at 200. Had the company not gone for the put option, the total loss would have been 250 rupees, but now the company has a loss of 200 because it has mitigated 50 rupees loss by using a put option. But in this example, since we could not cover the entire risk of 250, this hedge is an ineffective hedge. It is not an effective hedge. So ineffective and ineffective. Ineffective hedge means where you are not able to cover the risk properly, where there is an inappropriate hedge ratio. Now, in this case, the shares of ABC stock is an item that the company wants to protect. Hence, it is called a hedged item. And the put option that the company is using to offset the gain or loss is the hedging instrument, because using that instrument, I am protecting my hedged item. And this hedge item and hedging instrument makes a hedging relationship. For this, the put option, since the put option was entered specifically to protect the stock, that's why there is a hedging relationship. There has to be a documented relationship established from day one. There has to be an intent and objective to hedge the item using the hedging instrument. But since the hedge was not effective in our example, it could not cover the entire risk. Hence, we will discuss in the hedge accounting part. It has effects on the hedge accounting. So on the components part, we are clear what is a hedged item, what is a hedging instrument. These are the two components of a hedging relationship. But on the hedging instrument part, there is an exception. The written options cannot be used as hedging instruments. Why? So now let's understand this part first. So there are two types of options, as we discussed earlier as well, a put option and a call option. Both of these options can either be purchased or sold, that is written. When you purchase an option, you purchase a right. For put, it is a right to sell, and for call option, it is a right to buy. However, when you write an option or when you sell an option, you incur an obligation to sell or purchase, as the case may be. So for any transaction in options, one party purchases the option that the other party has written. So we don't want to be the party who has written the option. Since the purchasing party always has the upper hand, because he will exercise that option when it is favorable for him and unfavorable for us. So when you're trying to hedge a risk that already exists, you don't want to get exposed to another risk by writing an option. You don't want to incur another obligation. Therefore, whenever it is for hedging, you purchase an option so that you can exercise it in your favor. For hedged item, it can be a recognized asset or a liability. It can be an unrecognized firm commitment, a forecast transaction, or a net investment in foreign operation. And it can be a single item, a group of items, or a component of such single or group of items. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. So now the entity will designate a hedged item and a hedging instrument in a hedging relationship, and the hedge accounting will be done only if the hedging relationship qualifies for it. So there are certain criteria. If they are fulfilled, then the hedging relationship qualifies for hedge accounting. We will discuss it in next slide. So for many companies, uh, those enter into derivative contracts. They enter into derivative contracts with an intention to hedge, or there are some companies that do not enter into derivatives contract with an intention to hedge, because derivatives have multiple uses. It could be used for speculation, for arbitrage, or hedging, right? So there has to be an intention. But even though there is an intention to hedge, the company might not want to designate a hedging relationship and consequently might not want to go for hedge accounting. Hence, the hedge accounting is never a mandatory thing. It is an option given to the companies to make the P&L less volatile due to the changes in value of variable assets. Because if you go for FVTPL for every asset, it will make your P&L very volatile, because the fair value of the variable assets keeps on changing and they change way too much. So in order to control, to make the P&L a little bit stable, the hedge accounting has been given as an option. Now, what are the qualifying criteria for hedge accounting? So a hedging relationship qualifies for hedge accounting only if all the following criteria are met. Number one is there has to be an eligible hedging instrument. As we discussed, the written options are not hedging instruments, so there has to be an eligible hedging instrument and an eligible hedged item. Number two is at the inception of hedging relationship, there is a formal designation and documentation of the hedging relationship and the entity's objective and strategy for managing that risk. So there has to be an objective and intent to manage the risk, to hedge the risk, to use the hedging instrument to hedge that item. There has to be an objective. And the third part is where the hedging relationship should meet all the hedge effectiveness requirements, which are basically the economic relationship between the hedged item and hedging instruments. The effect of credit risk does not dominate the value changes that result from that economic relationship. And most important, the hedge ratio should reflect the balance between weightings of the hedged item and hedging instrument. The designation should result in an accounting outcome that is consistent with the purpose of hedge accounting. The hedge ratio should be so appropriate, should be so balanced that at the end you have a net impact of maybe nil or near to nil, because the purpose is to hedge. Now, once we have designated a hedging relationship that qualifies for hedge accounting, we shall determine the types of hedging relationship. Number one is the fair value hedge. Fair value hedge, the objective. So the objectives are very important here. Every type of hedging has a different objective. The fair value hedge has an objective to protect from changes in fair value of the hedged item, whereas the cash flow hedge has an objective to protect from cash flow variability attributable to a particular risk associated with the hedged item. And on the third part, hedge of net investment in foreign operations, the hedge of a monetary item accounted for as part of the net item, the net investment. Now let's discuss these types one by one. In case of fair value hedge, as I told you, the objective is very important. All these hedges have a different objective. So So when you're classifying a hedge, you have to keep in mind the objective of the hedge. So in case of fair value hedge, the objective is to stabilize the impact of gain or loss arising due to the changes in fair value. So the net impact will be reflected in P&L, and the resulting will be a less volatile P&L statement with hedged item at its current fair value. So the objective over here is to bring the hedged item at its fair value, but the impact of the changes in fair value should not impact its P&L that badly had there had been no hedging, right? So the objective is to minimize the impact of changes in fair value in the P&L whilst bringing the hedged item at its current fair value. So for fair value hedge, at every balance sheet date, how the accounting will go. So the gain or loss on hedging instrument will be recognized in profit and loss account, except in case the hedged item is an investment in equity instrument designated at FVOCI. It will be recognized in profit and loss account. Number two is the gain or loss on the hedged item will be recognized in profit and loss account with corresponding adjustment in the carrying amount of hedged item. So what these two entries will do, the gain or loss on the hedging instrument, which will be recognized in P&L, will be netted off with the gain or loss on the hedged item in the P&L, and the hedged item will be carried at its fair value. So we will recognize the changes in fair value, but with a less impact on P&L by netting of the impact of hedge instrument and hedged item. And on the settlement date, in case of a highly effective hedging relationship, where the hedge ratio is on point, the net impact would be nil on the P&L. And the derivative or the hedging instrument will be settled net in cash, and the hedged item will be carried at its fair value. So we will serve three purposes here. P&L, the net impact on P&L will be nil or near to nil. The derivative or hedging instrument will be settled in cash. So either you gain or you lost, and the hedged item will be carried at its fair value. On the other hand, when it's a cash flow hedge, the objective is to stabilize the cash flows of the company. If a company enters into a purchase contract today, in which the payment is to be made in, say, US dollars after a certain period of time, now since the rates fluctuate, so if the rate increases over time, consequently the company's cash flows will get higher. The cash flows, the payment that the company has to make on settlement will be higher than what the company would have made today. So in order to stabilize those cash flows, to protect the risk in increase of cash flows, the company will use cash flow hedge. So that on day zero, the company takes a hedge by entering into a forward contract to fix the purchase price of US dollars, so that on the settlement date, the net cash flows is capped at a fixed forward rate. So the company will do a capping on the cash flows. The net cash flow will not exceed a certain forward fixed rate, and your asset will be recognized at the fixed rate only. So the purpose here is to stabilize the cash flows, to fix the cash flows at a fixed rate. Now, how the accounting will go? At every balance sheet date, the gain or loss on the hedging instrument in this case is recognized in cash flow hedge reserve, not the P&L. Cash flow hedge reserve as a part of OCI, other comprehensive income, for all the effective hedges. In case the hedge is not effective, the ineffective part will be recognized in profit and loss account. And with recognizing the gain or loss in cash flow hedge reserve, a corresponding recognition will be done for a derivative asset or a derivative liability. And on maturity or settlement date, since At every balance sheet date, your transaction has not yet taken place, so there is no entry to be passed for the hedged item. Only the gain or loss on the hedging instrument will be recognized, and on the maturity or the settlement date, the accumulated balance in the cash flow hedge reserve will be included directly in the initial carrying amount of the asset or liability, so that your asset or liability is at the fixed rate that you had for the hedging instrument. And on the settlement date, your derivative asset or liability will be settled net in cash, and the net financial liability resulting from the hedge item will be at the fixed rate of the derivative contract. We will take an example for this. This is very easy. The third part, which is the hedge of net investment in foreign operations, is similar to cash flow hedge. The gain or loss is accumulated in foreign currency translation reserve instead of cash flow hedge reserve as a part of OCI for the effective hedge, and the remaining part in P&L. And on the disposal or the partial disposal of the foreign operation, the balance in FCTR will be reclassified from equity to P&L. Now, to understand the cash flow hedge, let's take an example. Here in this case, company A, which is operating in INR, has entered into a purchase contract which involves payment in US dollars, which is $20 million after 6 months. In order to hedge the exposure to exchange rate fluctuation, the company enters into a forward contract with bank to buy US dollars, 20 million. So there's a typing mistake, I guess. 20 million US dollars at 70 rupees per dollar. So now what has happened? The company, which is operating in INR, has entered into a purchase contract which involves payment in US dollars, 20 million US dollars, which the company has to pay after 6 months from today's time. And the asset will be delivered after 6 months only. Since the exchange rate of INR to US dollar is variable and it keeps fluctuating, hence the company is afraid that the value of INR will fall significantly and it will have to make payment for higher INR. So, in order to protect this, to cover this risk, the company enters into an offsetting contract with the bank to buy $20 million for a fixed rate of 70 rupees per dollar. By doing this, the company is secured from the exchange rate fluctuation as of now, and because the bank will provide the US dollars at a fixed rate of 70 in 6 months time. So the company is secured from the exchange rate fluctuation. Whatever the rate be at that time, the bank will provide the US dollars at 70 rupees fixed. The company doesn't have to bother about what the rate is going on in the market. Now, say after 6 months, the rate is 74. It will receive $20 million from bank at 70 rupees, which means the company will give 1400 million rupees to the bank and will receive 20 million US dollars, which are actually worth of 1480 million rupees. Because in the market, the rate is 74. So here, the gain of 80 million rupees will be recognized in cash flow hedge reserve, because this is a cash flow hedge. And on the settlement date, it can fulfill its commitment of purchase, which is worth 1480 million rupees only. Now, how the entries will go? The first entry that we have done is to recognize the gain on the forward contract by crediting the cash flow hedge reserve with the 80 million rupees, and by recognizing a derivative liability at 80 million rupees. Next is the settlement of the purchase contract. We receive our asset at the market rate, because first of all, we will recognize the asset at its market rate, which is 74 for $20 million, 1480 million rupees against the payment in cash or bank, whatever. Next entry will be for the settlement of derivative contract. Since we gained on the derivative part, so we will receive cash to settle the derivative part. So we receive a 80 million rupees on the derivative, and the derivative asset has been de-recognized. And now the most important entry is to transfer the cash flow hedge reserve to the value of asset. You can see the 80 million have been transferred from cash flow hedge reserve to the asset. Now, what is the net impact? Net impact is that the asset has been recognized at the forward rate of 70, net of 1400, and the payment, the cash flow that the company has made is again fixed at 70, which is 1400 million rupees. Because you, on the host contract, on the purchase contract, you had to make a payment of 1480 million rupees, but on the other hand, you received 80 million rupees on the derivative asset, so the net impact is 1400 million rupees of cash outflow. So this was the example for cash flow hedge, and it was very easy, I guess. So for hedge accounting, the most important part is to keep in mind the objective, and accordingly for fair value it goes to P&L, for cash flow it goes to cash flow hedge reserve. That's all. So that's all from my side. Sumit ji, are you there? If you guys have any doubt, any query, so if you guys have any query, you can post live in the chat, or maybe you can reach out to me later on my email ID and the number. And also you can follow and subscribe my YouTube channel, where I post some IFRS and India's related videos, and my blog where I give you the notes. If you have any questions, what are the effects of corporation action on futures contract? So, Sunit Jangra has asked a question. What are the effects of corporation action on futures contract? So, Sunit, it depends what is the purpose of entering into a future contract, whether it's just for whether the company is just trading in the derivative part, or it is the company is using the forward future contract to hedge any other contract. So it depends on the purpose for which the company has entered into the future contract, and accordingly the treatment will be, if it is for just trading or just to hold the derivative for whatever the period it is, then the accounting will be as per the derivative usual, and if it's for hedging, then we will go for the hedge accounting.
Ji, Chandni ji, wonderful deliberation. Two query I would like to ask.
Yes.
What are the effect of the cooperation action on future contracts?
Yes, Sumit ji, I have addressed that query already.
Okay. Already,
Yeah.
you have taken the Hitesh Agrawal query. We need to calculate.
We need to calculate NPV of the deal as well once transferred to OCI, isn't? No, actually, so it depends. For a cash flow hedge, once you transfer, so you transfer the amount to OCI only when so the cash flow hedge reserve, you create the cash flow hedge reserve, which is a part of OCI only. So you need not calculate NPV of the deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think you have covered the topic of cash flow hedge.
Yes, I have covered the topic of cash flow hedge. There is another query from Rakesh Agarwal. If the company has purchased forward rate at 65 6 months ahead, then liability will be settled at 65 and not 68. Yes, Rakesh ji, the liability will be settled at 65 and not at 68. So the entries that I had shown you were individual entries. When you see the net impact, it will be at 65 only. So once you settle at 68, but you on the other hand get make the settlement at 65. So the net impact will be at 65 only, not at the 68.
Okay.
Any other queries? I
No,
guess.
no other query. I think you have wonderfully covered this technical topic very beautifully, so that
Thank you so much.
all able to understand very well.
Thank you.
I think no other query relating to this topic. So Chandni ji, your final any words before closing?
I guess that's it. This was a very cut short explanation. There are many things, many details into it as well. But to
Okay.
understand on on an Uber level, I think this PPT, this presentation was quite comprehensive. But in case anybody has any doubt, you can always reach out to me and we can discuss it offline.
Thank you, Chandni ji, for your wonderful deliberation as usual. First time you are giving this Team Casa platform, and beautifully you have covered the topic.
Thank you
And
so much.
you have also shared the contact details so that any query relating to this topic,
Yes.
anyone can mail to you.
Yes,
And
definitely.
thank you for joining this 8th master class on this Indias. We will try to involve you as much as possible. Thank
Sure,
you all.
definitely.
Thank you all viewers for watching, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you.
Sumit ji, for
Thank you,
having
Asha.
me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandni.
Thanks. Bye.